Eric Smith is going to be moderating our 5G panel. He's the Vice President Regulatory Affairs at the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, where, among other responsibilities, he's the CWTA's lead for the 5G Canada Council. Prior to joining the CWTA in 2017, Eric held a variety of positions at BlackBerry, including Head of Government Relations for Canada and Divisional General Counsel. Please welcome our panel looking at the 5G journey. Eric?
Thanks very much, Mark, and welcome everyone. We've heard a lot about 5G already at this conference, and we hope to go a bit of a deeper dive here and dispel some of the myths and get a really good perspective on where 5G is today in Canada and where it's going. As Mark mentioned, I'm a CWTA, so most of you probably know us, Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, and what we do is promote and advocate on behalf of the Canada's mobile wireless industry, including the operators, equipment vendors, and other people who are part of the ecosystem. And we have one worldwide office in Ottawa, so we're a small organization, but I think we do a lot of great work. So for this panel, just before I introduce the panelists, just want to make a few comments. I always like to go back to the theme of a conference, and as you know from your brochure, the conference theme here is innovation and disruption in ICT, reinventing and securing our business and personal lives. And at CWTA, one of the major themes that we always like to talk about is how transformative wireless mobile has been to Canadian society. And while a lot of the attention goes to sort of the over-the-top players, the latest and greatest new thing, really the leadership and innovation of Canada's facilities-based wireless operators and the equipment vendors that supply to them is often overlooked. And we heard yesterday in one of the speakers talking about operators being the invisible brand. And I think that's often the case where our operators don't get the credit that's due. And I think 5G presents an opportunity to shine the light on the importance of our wireless networks and how Canada is a leader in wireless and how they can be a catalyst for innovation and economic growth. So Mark mentioned the 5G Canada Council. We created that council as a multi-stakeholder forum to encourage and support a dynamic 5G ecosystem here in Canada, and to discuss issues, opportunities, obstacles, etc. And many of you will have attended our conference back in February. Just today actually, our 5G Canada Council website went live, so if you want to take a look at it, it's 5gcc.ca. So today we've assembled a star-studded panel of industry leaders who are ready to discuss the opportunities and uncertainties around 5G. I will say off the top that our panel has very in-depth technical knowledge. On the other hand, your moderator is a lawyer, and therefore he does not. Although I do know quite a bit about 5G. But if you hear me really confidently using some technical term or jargon incorrectly, just as I've told the panel, just please play along with it, and I'd ask the audience to do that as well. After introducing the panelists, I'll ask each of them to give some opening remarks. We'll then have a moderated question and answer discussion, and of course there'll be plenty of time for questions from the audience, so I ask you to start thinking of your questions now, and definitely don't be shy when the time comes. We have microphones set up, and we really look forward to hearing what's on your mind and the questions that you have. So without further ado, starting from closest to me, we have Bruce Rodin. Bruce is the Vice President of Wireless Networks at Bell. Next to him is Tim Dinesen, who's Executive Vice President Network at Xplornet. And then next to Tim, we have Kyriakos Vergos, who's VP of Sales North America for Airspan Networks. And then next to him is Brian O'Shaughnessy, who's Senior Vice President and CTO Converged Networks at Shaw Communications. And then last but not least, Alexander Brock, who's Senior Vice President Network Technology at Rogers. So I think first we're going to have opening remarks. So I think we'll start with Bruce. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to share the journey that we're on at Bell and our evolution of our network. I would say, as it relates to 5G, that in many ways the transition has started already. are very active in densifying the cell sites, like putting more cell sites in so the higher bands can be ubiquitously connected. We virtualized elements of our network. The core network is virtualized so that it can proliferate out to the edge gracefully. We focused on fiberizing the sites. We have significant bandwidth to our sites, so we're connected with fiber. And part of that then is centralizing the baseband. The architectures that support 5G, fundamentally to get everything out of 5G have to change. So we've done the initial stage of that, and then future-proofing in building systems, right? So expenditures that are being made today are going to be future-proofed well into the future, and so in that sense we've started. In addition to that, over 2 years ago, we had our first lab trials with 5G, and the infrastructure, has evolved. We are currently in the field, active in the field with operating at both 3.5 gig and millimeter wave at 28 on experimental licenses. Interesting thing about 3.5, one of the things we wanted to validate was that at 3.5 with massive MIMO, you can pretty much replicate your mid-band coverage footprint. So for us, that means that 76% of the Canadian population can be covered without building incremental sites, right? People talk about 5G and all the sites you have to build, and that's true at millimeter wave. There are places in downtown Toronto that could support a constellation of millimeter wave today, so that will grow as traffic density requirements grow. And we're not stopping there with our trials, of course. We're expanding, with a dense urban market, a high-speed corridor on the 400 series highways, some rural activity in 5G as well. Building our knowledge base and tuning up our understanding of the technology as we drive towards launch. I would say too that 5G is more than a waveform. The waveform itself is maybe 30% more efficient than LTE, but advanced antennas, wider channels, more sites, that's what really gives you the significant traffic density. So I think you've probably all seen the collection of features of 5G. The one for us that's quite exciting, I think should be quite exciting for the industry, is the impact on response time. Getting down to millisecond response time requires that kind of re-architecture that I talked about, centralized RAN, implementing multi-access edge computing so that you can really support those augmented reality, virtual reality, drone control, autonomous vehicle type applications that really need that latency. So I think that's the real differentiating feature. All the other stuff's important. We expect to ride a cost curve down in terms of cost delivered per bit delivered, but we're pretty excited about full 5G and implementing some pretty exciting capabilities, an evolution of the network, but a revolution in terms of what the network is capable of doing.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for inviting me. Tim Dinesen, Executive Vice President of Xplornet. For those of you not familiar with our company, we focus on delivery of broadband services to residential and commercial customers in rural Canada over a combination of fixed wireless and satellite platforms. Now, that's a pretty dense statement. I'll unpack some of that, so give us some context for what we're talking about today. Keywords for us in the context of today's conversation are fixed wireless and rural, maybe as different from mobile and urban, which tend to get a lot of attention. Fixed is very important, as is the rural market. We've talked a lot about in different sources the concept of rural-urban divide when it comes to access to broadband services. In some of our policy discussions and some of our regulatory discussions. One thing we know for sure, and Xplornet specifically, is that rural Canadians want access to the same services that people in urban Canada enjoy as well. And just to illustrate the point, Xplornet's LTE network alone, setting aside satellite, setting aside other sources of delivery, just our LTE network delivers on a daily basis typically the same amount of data as a Tier 1 mobile operator does to its mobile customers. I'll let that sink in, because that's not a well-known well-known stat. It's a serious network that we deliver and delivering to the demand of Canadians in rural markets. That's not just a plug for fixed wireless, although it is a plug for fixed wireless. It does, I think, bring to the discussion our view, which is the distinction between mobile and fixed as use cases is becoming less important technologically. Certainly there'll be continuing important differences in the products as categories, but as we look forward to 5G and some of the things that Bruce was mentioning with respect to low latency, highly power efficient use cases, the use case difference technologically becomes less different. So important for us to position ourselves in such a way that we're able to deliver on a number of different products maybe that we didn't anticipate currently. For Xplornet, we've all heard the hype. We've all seen the PowerPoint, massive Internet of Things and connected cars and remote learning, remote surgery. Really what we're looking for is much more efficient ways to deliver capacity to our customers using the same resources that we currently have. The sites that we have in place, the investments we're making in RAN architecture and core architecture, and spectrum availability. Speaking of spectrum, Xplornet is one of the largest licensed holders of 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, which if you've been following the 5G scorecard is widely considered to be a very important band for the development of 5G networks. Xplornet has a rich heritage of bringing 3.5 gigahertz to use in our fixed wireless deployments. We look forward to doing so as we roll out our 5G platforms. Eric, I think that's sufficient for my closing comments. Hopefully I've left a few ideas we can hang on to for our discussion.
That's great, Tim. And I do want to emphasize to the audience, we didn't rehearse any of this really. We had maybe a 5-minute call and just said, let's freewheel it. And already you guys are ticking off many of the questions I was going to ask you. So that's great. Kyriakos, over to you.
Thank you. As I said before, Kyriakos Vergos. I run sales and business development for Airspan in the Americas. Quick plug, I guess, for my company. I don't want to be different. Airspan today is the latest entrant in the top bracket of LTE vendors. We are the world's largest small cell LTE vendor. We are particularly known for setting up network architectures that include independent, fully spec'd out small cells that are yet run on a distributed SON architecture to make them plug and play. We integrate our backhaul to these nodes, to these eNode Bs, and that makes us fairly unique. In terms of what we're doing with respect to 5G, one would think that as we are the largest specialist in small cells in LTE, 5G is a good thing for us. Everybody seems to believe that 5G is going to be all about, as Bruce mentioned earlier, about densification, and it is going to be to a large degree about small cells. So we're very excited about all that. Different routes to 5G small cells, however, that we are also working towards. On one hand, you have these much discussed C-RANs and V-RANs that are clearly going to play a major role in 5G. We are developing our own vRAN architecture for that. A lot of obvious advantages that have already been much discussed about going down that route. The whole thing about NFV that we've been hearing about for years, network function virtualization, that ties in very nicely with the whole C-RAN and vRAN concept. We have seen ourselves, based on our own data, that you get some very major economic benefits by going down that route for 5G. However, there are some major challenges that we ourselves are not sure how they'll be resolved. One of the most obvious ones being the lack of dark fiber. A lot of these 5G architectures to be are very much dark fiber driven, And we all know that there's nowhere near enough dark fiber in the world today to really get to where we need to get to with such architectures. So it remains to be seen how quickly we can get to deploy more dark fiber to get to this minimum threshold required. On the other hand, there are other architectures that are being proposed, more to do with independent eNode Bs that might work on a distributed basis, based on a SON or whatever. That's another approach. The whole thing about mixing, mashing different bits of spectrum within a single system, getting massive bandwidth on each specific eNode B. That's fairly straightforward. And, speaking of the technology challenges ahead in 5G. However, again, even when one looks at that, there's still some very significant challenges to be overcome to get to a true 5G environment. One of the things that I always wonder about is, for instance, we're all excited about getting to millimeter radio solutions in 5G, doing 28 gig, doing 60 gig, etc. Yet there's a lot of talk about how with such spectrum and such solutions we'll be able to do non-line of sight, we'll be able to penetrate glass and into buildings. I hear a lot of contradictory. I personally, by the way, I'm not very technical, but I've been around in the industry for 25 plus years, and I find it very challenging to try and understand how we're going to achieve some of these goals in 5G with millimeter radios. We have great engineers working towards this stuff, but I still see a number of technical issues that still need to be resolved on that front. Talking about challenges that we need to focus on and not get carried away as to how quickly 5G can be implemented. I've mentioned 2 or 3 more. I believe here there's already been an active discussion on spectrum. Obviously, when we're talking about single sectors or single systems doing 80 megahertz of spectrum, that's wonderful, technically speaking. But I was sure all the tier 1 carriers that need to have these massive reserves of spectrum actually have them. What are the regulators doing about it? I see all around the world that regulators are way behind in most cases in releasing enough spectrum to make 5G a reality. And in many, if not most cases, it's going to take years and years and years before we get to the right regulatory environment for 5G to truly take off. So that's another major challenge. Devices, on the infrastructure side, RAN vendors, we are pretty well advanced with our R&D programs to coming up with something that looks like 5G. In terms of a devices ecosystem, talking about IoT, and from what I see, there's still a lot of work to be done on the device front, on the chipset front for devices to hit the right economics for IoT to truly take off. A lot of work still to be done. I'd say a lot of it hasn't even begun. There's a certain discrepancy between how 5G is beginning to be looked at and to be regulated worldwide, and that in itself is a challenge and a threat. We've seen Europe go down one specific route with respect to 3.5 gig spectrum range. We've seen the US take a somewhat different approach with their CBRS band and the whole shared spectrum concept, which, if it works, could be fantastically rewarding, and we could see a lot of other regulators following the FCC footsteps, but the jury's out yet. So it'll be very interesting to see how ultimately Canada decides to approach this issue at the regulatory level.
I think we'll come to that a bit later.
Absolutely.
And if I could just stop you right there, and we'll come back to some of those topics. Brian, if you could just give a few opening remarks. Great.
Sure, great.
Thanks.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And Alexander and I were talking at the beginning about how when you get this far down, it's almost at this point you say ditto and move on. But let me just give a couple of comments as it relates to specifics from a Shaw perspective. And I'll key off a word that Bruce used where he called it a journey. And I think that's really the key here, is if we're going down 5G path, this is not an event that's going to happen next week, next month, next year. It's a series of activities we all need to take into account in our businesses. And from a Shaw point of view, we've got the fortune of, over the last number of years, we've been virtually upgrading everything, and literally upgrading everything in our network to modern technology. So we've already implemented a virtualized core, complete virtualized core, and swapped out old gear. We're already rolling out 5G compatible base stations. So once the spec is ready, we have the advantage of having 100,000 Wi-Fi hotspots, which only have, in the western part of the country, it only has three things, right? Attach rights, power, and backhaul, which are kind of the three important things if you want to get into the small cell world. And we're upgrading to fiber throughout. So there's a lot of things going on already, and I think every carrier is focused on incrementally getting ready for when things are going to come. We also have just completed a trial, and part of it is learning, as many people are doing, a trial leveraging both 3.5 gigahertz and 28 gigahertz millimeter wave technology. And the big aha out of there, if you want to look at what comes with very high frequencies, is a wonderful thing called very short wavelengths. And you get these antennas, especially at the millimeter wave size, where you can put very compact antennas on a tower, on a rooftop, on wherever, and get decent range, very good range, beamforming for high speeds, interference control, things of that nature. And it's the big thing that comes along with the higher frequencies. It lets you get things on a scale that can actually be put on a tower. If you tried to do that with the frequencies we have now, you'd be putting barn doors up on towers, and that just won't work. So it's a big piece coming along. Last thing I'm going to say, and we'll get into all kinds of things around spectrum and other things as we go through the panel. The last one is that's really important with all the discussion around 5G and how quickly it's coming. You kind of have to have standards complete first before you can jump at it. And guess what? Those standards are completing this month. So it's great that we're all doing trials. And I can guarantee you, after many, many years in this industry, the standard Rev 0 comes out, you do a bunch of early deployments, and 18 months later you get the follow-on fixed capabilities that is really, truly deployable. So you can kind of see over the next 2 years is when things start to become interesting in the 5G world.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ryan. And last but not least, Alexander.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us on the panel. A little bit about me. I'm Alexander Brock. I do network and IT technology strategy and architecture for Rogers. As you know, we operate a national network, all the way including up to 4G, and have, similar to my other people on the panel, been upgrading our networks to be ready for 5G in all of its opportunities. And that means getting new radios with MIMO in them and having them as being 5G ready. For us, it's much more than just the opportunity for 5G is much more than just speed. It's about all of the other opportunities that the technology brings in terms of capabilities for new applications and services. And so our focus is very much on how is Canada going to overlay these new capabilities across the country to open up all sorts of new services and opportunities for both consumers and for enterprise and small business, for rural, for urban, across the whole country. And that's really the key to 5G is that it's not just more of the same and some more speed and just always on and always connected. It's about the real-time economy now, the ability to segment the networks into exactly what it is that our customers want to do, be they consumers or commercial, and leverage the capabilities in terms of things like network slicing to create opportunities, whether it's ultra-low latency or ultra-low power, or the ability to combine them into on-demand services on the basis of the value of the transaction that's happening to that particular customer. And really, that's really where our focus is. How do we layer on 5G onto, let's face it, Canada has some of the best networks in the world. And the idea now is to how do we leverage 5G on top of them. Canada's got its unique challenges in terms of geography and population. So this is going to be, at least in our view, an evolutionary process which is why we're spending a lot of time making sure that our network coast to coast is ready for 5G across the board, and then how we layer on those comments on new frequencies that are coming, whether it be on small cells, whether it be on massive MIMO, in those particular applications, be they urban, suburban, or rural. From our perspective, it's much more than just the sort of proliferation of smartphones. It's about bandwidth, scalability, reliability, and the sort of the huge number of connected devices that we're going to have on our networks. I mean, the bottom line is that with 5G, all of the shackles that we've had up to date on 4G will disappear. Both in terms of the amount of bandwidth, the size of the radio channels, the degree to which we can have hundreds of thousands of devices per square kilometer, opens up all sorts of possibilities for new vertical and horizontal markets, whether it be in the commercial space, whether it be in government, smart cities, and the like. And that's really the secret sauce for 5G, is essentially opening up possibilities that we simply couldn't do well in 4G. It was designed a while ago, and the technology has moved on. So the combination of new frequencies, new technologies, and a solid foundation is where Rogers is focusing its efforts. Similar to other panelists, we've been doing trials both indoor and out, small cells and the like, getting ready for all of this and figuring out exactly how it's going to work. But a large portion of our focus is on trying to figure out what those use cases that are specific to Canada are going to be. And in our case, and trying to dovetail into areas where we've traditionally done well in areas in machine-to-machine, automotive, logistics and the like, energy management, and basically seeing how 5G is going to change those vertical and horizontal markets over time. So our view is 5G is spectacularly exciting. It's going to be a great overlay technology for networks and for Canadians. And our approach is to connect Canadians to that world of possibilities that this new technology provides.
Great, thanks very much, Alexander. So, we at CLBT, we've been following 5G for a while now, and certainly there's been, the initial stages, like a lot of things, a lot of the hype. And then we get into some of the more skeptics about it, people talking about some of the uncertainty. Someone earlier today quoted someone else saying that 5G is a big Bigfoot. And I'm the optimist, so I like to say, well, at least there's been sightings, so that's good. And maybe early on it was a blurry video footage of Bigfoot, but I think we're starting to see more clarity around what it can be. So I think in the time we have left in the discussion we have, I'd like to kind of focus on those two things, the opportunities, the excitement of 5G, and also some of the uncertainties and what needs to be done to really realize the full potential. So, Alexander, you talked about exciting use cases, and we've all read about different things. I'm just wondering if I get just a little bit of comment from everyone in terms of what use cases from sort of the consumer or the end user perspective are you most excited about in terms of that either will really make a difference, that are achievable, whether in the long term or the short term, but what are the things that you really look forward to seeing that you think 5G can offer Canada?
I mean, firstly, Bigfoot keeps getting cited, so clearly there's somebody around. But the thing that is exciting in this is that whether it's smart cities where we want to connect, the cities themselves want to have a better universe for the people that live in the area. They want connectivity. They want information to be disseminated across the city. They want better control of infrastructure than they have today. And doing it in wired simply was too expensive, and frankly, doing it on existing technologies is also it's got its limitations. 5G opens up all manner of opportunities in terms of just the sheer number of things that can be connected and managed and controlled and linked together in terms of useful information as opposed to just data, and providing that to everything from individuals to companies to to anybody that wants to use it. whether it be down to the individual, as I say, verticals like the automotive sector, who clearly, the automotive industry is going through a spectacular revolution driven by, both the electric car economy, which will then drive into, autonomous vehicles and the like. That's going to drive a huge amount of ancillary requirements for connectivity. For the first time ever, I think we have the capabilities from a technology perspective to actually meet that challenge, both in terms of people sitting in cars. If you've got an autonomous car and it's driving you home and you're downloading an 8K video, and everybody's on the Gardner or one of our other roads, and it's still a parking lot, that's an awful lot of bandwidth, and that's the kind of things that are going to need to be delivered over 5G, just in terms of the amount of spectrum that's required and the amount of bandwidth that's going to be consumed. But at the same time, it comes at it from both ends. Wide area coverage to actually make sure that everything is connected, and huge amounts of bandwidth to deliver what people actually want to do in real time. And it's really that combination. But it's, the manufacturing industry will get revolutionized, which obviously, both for factories indoors, but also mining, natural resources, etc. For autonomous vehicles for that are something that people have been looking for years. We've worked with a number of companies to look at that, and it's only just now going to be realized, A, for bandwidth, and B, that degree to which real time is possible, and ultra low latency, down to, you need for virtual reality, you've got to get yourself down to below 17, 18 milliseconds to get yourself down to the sort of real time command and control. You've got to get yourself down to 10 milliseconds or less, and then, the ultimate goal is to get down to a millisecond for absolute real time. This is possible with the technology that is coming, and it's been something that we've been wanting to do for a while. Everybody's been wanting to do it for a while, and it's just coming to bear. You combine that with huge amounts of bandwidth, it opens up all manner of things that will change industries. We're not going to change things. People show up at everybody's door every day with, I'd like to do X. I want to change the way our industry works right now. And I think this, 5G will open up many of these new possibilities.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hype cycle, we all understand the hype cycle. I think the development teams don't get too excited about the hype cycle. We've seen it before, so we understand how these things work, but we're steady on it. I think what's exciting about 5G is that institutions in general, be it industry, be it municipalities, be it the healthcare systems, all under stress. Everyone has to do more with less. And I think there's an awareness that 5G can really play a role. And I've said before that the economy is made up of millions of business processes. Connectivity and intelligent solution providers can optimize how goods and services are produced. And I think increasingly, more so than we had LTE, I think people are seeing the power of these technologies, the ubiquity of the coverage, and thinking, yeah, I understand my business model and my little piece of the economy, and I can see how 5G can really help. So it's really a composite of all of those things I think is going to help fund it and continue to flourish as an industry.
It's kind of like asking a smartphone manufacturer circa 2008 the importance of apps. And I think once the industry gets to understand the capabilities and starts to understand how these can be applied to long-standing commercial, industrial, social problems, that we'll start to see the emergence of really groundbreaking and arguably disruptive applications of this fundamentally different network fabric that we're looking at. So we're still at the point of talking about features and capabilities and network requirements. I think we're just at the beginning of starting to understand how those can be combined together to solve real problems.
I use that app analogy all the time, and now I'm glad I have someone I can quote for it, so that's rather than just people relying on me. So that's
you can have it, Eric.
Oh, thanks. Anyone else want to?
I was just going to say one item that 5G, when it first comes out, we always have paint these wonderful pictures of what's going to come. I think when it first comes out, you know what it's going to be? Better 4G. And it's really about all of us getting our networks into a state that can handle things in a better way. And I agree with the point about the app analogy. Quite frankly, there's a bunch of people sitting in a basement somewhere coming up with ideas that we haven't even thought of that is going to make a big difference. So it's just getting, we have to create the environment, as you had said, in terms of to allow things to start to occur and improve things for our customers, and everything will follow after that.
What are the opportunities, maybe then, switching it from not just the opportunities for the end user, but for operators themselves? There's you hear about potential efficiencies, for the operators, but in terms of business opportunities, in terms of, are operators still just going to be providing connectivity, or are there business cases around 5G that will be new that you're thinking about that will be, contribute to the bottom line? Anyone? Let's have Kyriakos, just because.
So I promised I wouldn't say this before we got up here, but I will have to say it. I agree with Brian. Not that I promised not to say that I agree with Brian, but I promised to avoid this kind of classic jargon of a panel discussion. I agree with, but I do agree with you in that 5G is, at the end of the day, and to begin with, it's an effort to do better 4G. But going back to your question about use cases, I'm not a carrier, but we try to pander, of course, the carrier's interests. What we believe will be happening, and I'd love to hear from the carriers themselves, but our view is that, first of all, we need, in an incremental way, moving away from 4G to 5G, we need to improve capacity in the networks. We still have a lot of gaps in network coverage, even with the best networks, but not so much anymore in terms of coverage, but in terms of capacity, particularly in-building capacity. And I would very much expect that 5G, as it forces greater densification, greater deployment of small cells, we're going to do more and more capacity indoors. So that in itself is going to be a big improvement for everybody. In terms of some of the more high-profile, sort of fancy applications, such as autonomous vehicles, I'm extremely excited by such stuff. Unfortunately, I'm also somewhat skeptical about how soon we're going to see it happen. And it's not so much a technology thing. Some would argue in this room that we have the technology today for perfectly well, functioning autonomous vehicle networks and stuff. And with 5G, of course, the capability will be improved, but it's much more than that, as we all know. There are huge regulatory, political, social issues that need to be overcome. So if I had to lay a wager, I'd say a lot of people are saying we're only 5 years away from seeing massive implementation of autonomous vehicles. I would wager we're probably 15 years away, at the very least.
I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I think that if I knew what the new business models were, I wouldn't say. But we are creating a powerful network. Stating the obvious, working our way up in the value equation above connectivity, baseline connectivity. I agree. I think there is a lot of hype around autonomous vehicles when you really practically think about it, especially in our climate. It's going to be a while. But, I think we should be doing autonomous vehicles. Yeah, it's kind of nice not to have to drive, maybe, some kinds, but it should be safer, right? Like, there should be savings to the economy. There should be less accidents. Insurance rates should go down. And as a facilitator, it's just an example, we should be capable of participating in that. Alexander commented on network slicing, creating customizable networks really within networks that can add value, to be it public safety or hydro or taxis or whatever, right? So I think as time moves on, there'll be opportunities that open up, and we'll have capabilities with software-defined networks that we'll have in place to capitalize on that without having to spend years to do it. It should be very quick and efficient, and be a lot cheaper than people doing it on their own. So.
And playing off that as well, I agree 100% that where it's going to be is who we partner with, how we get together as carriers. And network slicing is one of the pieces where we bring some value that can make that whole value chain work well. Mobile edge compute is the other one you hear a lot about, where we're going to you have to put things at the edge, decision-making at the edge to allow the low latency, but also for certain services to work properly and get things organized in a way that can deliver a service to a customer in a way that can't be done from a centralized data center. So what carriers bring to the table is the ability to pull all these pieces together, find partners to work with to deliver a service to the customer in a way that adds value to them, And that's how we move up the value chain. We start getting involved in that kind of activity to deliver better services for the customers.
So while I completely agree with Brian on his last point, I'm going to be the contrarian on the panel in terms of 5G is just like 4G with steroids. It isn't. The capabilities of 5G are that you can get it down to the individual application. You can customize. For the first time ever, we don't have to, it's not all about tonnage. It's not about just how many packets you pass across the network and everybody gets the same stuff. It's just how big of a bucket it is for everybody. It's about the value of the transaction that happens and the ability to customize it, whether it's on the basis of latency, whether it's on the basis of scalable bandwidth, whether it's on the basis of a power consumption in terms of having a device that can sit there for 10 years on a battery, and just sit there monitoring. It's how, to Bruce's point, how we face the customers in terms of the capability set and move up that stack. The ability for us to offer more than here's how you plug in, how much would you like, is a radical change in 5G that isn't really possible in 4G. And there's a lot of opportunities in terms of research that's being done, much of which is actually being helped and funded by the government, things like the NCORE initiative, to actually foster these capabilities that are inherent in 5G. So yes, it's an overlay, and yes, it does it's more bandwidth and everything else, but it's much more than that in terms of these fundamental capabilities that we can sort of do them or fudge them today in IoT and sort of machine to machine, but it will be a whole new set of opportunities for Canadian both consumers and enterprise customers in terms of their ability to interface with the network and ask for the things they want. So Bruce's comment about whether it's public safety, security, and the like, each one of them has got their own applications and requirements. That, for the first time, is something we can do on 5G. So our view, in my view, is a little bit contrarian. It's not like 4G.
Well, that's good. We want to hear different views here. We hear a lot about the race to 5G. One industry analyst group, labeled Canada 5G superpower and said it's, likely one of the countries best prepared for 5G. Another ranked Canada in the lowest of 3 tiers of countries in terms of readiness for 5G, and one of the main reasons, really the main reason for putting us in that grouping was a lack of visibility into the timing of key spectrum being made available. Yesterday we heard a lot of talk about spectrum, and we saw a lot of news articles come out of yesterday's discussion around spectrum. How important is it for Canada to not necessarily win the race to 5G, but to be in that top tier of countries? And what challenges does Canada face, and also what advantages do you think Canada has? And maybe I'll ask Tim to start off on that.
Sure. Spectrum's important, and I think if we are lagging in any way, it is on the regulatory front. Standards are good, decisions are good. The investments that Xplornet and other operators are making are relying to some extent on being able to look forward and understand where band plans are going to land. You kind of need to understand what frequencies you're going to use before you can start talking to the equipment manufacturers about what radios are going to produce and what devices we're going to procure from them. So critically important that we have more regulatory certainty than we have. And other jurisdictions have been much more forward-looking with respect to opening up big chunks of usable spectrum to bring to 5G. Importance of being first, I think it's building on Brian and Alexander's comments. This is a progression. It's not going to all of a sudden just happen. And we expect that the progress from 4G to 5G will be much more evolutionary than, say, going from making the step functions through previous generations. We already have a lot of the hardware standards, a lot of the hardware capabilities in place that we're actively putting into our networks in anticipation of the 5G standards further evolving. the important point is as investors and developers of networks, to keep options open to an extent, but also not paint yourself in a corner with respect to what kind of capital you're planting in the ground. Canada has a rich heritage of solving seemingly intractable problems. Telecommunications in this country has never been for the faint of heart, and we're the inventors of the touchscreen. We're forerunners in the development of the smartphone. The heritage of Bell Northern Research and Nortel developed a lot of the wireless infrastructure in the first place, going back to satellite communications. So let's not be too understated or shy about the fact that as a country and as an industry, and some of us on this stage have been contributing to that. I think we'll continue to do so. If there's anything that we need is the investment of capital and the development of strong regulatory frameworks to help give us confidence to keep doing that.
Well, we're going to hire you as a CWT ambassador because I think that's a very, very good message. Anyone else want to add to that in terms of the challenges and also opportunities?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, one of the things that's driven success in Canada and telecom is having rich competition across the board and driving new ideas, new ways, everyone trying to find new approaches to the business. And I think that's going to continue to be the case moving forward into 5G. So I think what the government needs to do is focus on spectrum, is getting spectrum out as quickly as it can to the carriers and let us go at it against each other and try and outdo each other. And I think the other thing, we keep hearing about different bands of spectrum, et cetera, how it's going to be used. There's really three pieces that fit together, right? And everywhere you go around the world, whether it's in Europe or Asia or US, everyone's talking about low-band spectrum as the anchor for covering very broad areas, mid-band 600 megahertz or 700 megahertz, depending on where you are in the world. Then the 3.5 we've been talking about today for urban density and cells and properly covering a city. And then the millimeter wave stuff, the 28 gigahertz, for really high density areas, whether it's an airport, a concert hall, a fairground, or just the downtown core to get really, really, really high speeds. And it's putting those in play in totality that will allow operators to really get to the end game and produce a 5G architecture that is what people are looking for.
And on the spectrum front, if there's a little bit of good news is, it's our understanding anyway that at least the spectrum outlook, that sort of 5-year plan that ISED puts out, will be released imminently, which is good. Obviously, the details of it will be what's important in terms of the timing and when consultations and awardings and auctions and stuff take place. But at least we should have some more visibility soon, I hope. Alexander.
I just want to pick up on your original question, which is, clearly spectrum is the lifeblood for the industry, but it's also the lifeblood for the entire economy of Canada. The telecommunications industry as a whole drives a lot of what happens in the rest of the economy. So getting that spectrum out there is about Canada being competitive. It is about getting Canadians access to the latest technology to innovate on, which is a rich history that this country has. So yeah, it is important to get it out there as quickly as possible. The technology will arrive, the standards will work their way, but ultimately getting it out there and getting competition in place influences far more than just this industry today, and how many people attach to it. It permeates the rest of the economy. And so I think that is really the element of why Canada, the spectrum needs to get out there as quickly as possible to ensure that Canada is competitive with what's going on in the US. And it's clear that the US market is taking a lead in 5G. It took a lead in 4G as well, and we need to be part of that evolution.
I think it's a very good point. I mean, the hurdle I have when I talk to people who don't live and breathe mobile wireless is when they think about wireless, they traditionally think of what they have in their pocket, their smartphone. And while they wouldn't live without it, they don't necessarily see the way that mobile enables our society, the way mobile enables our economy. And with 5G, I think that's just going to be exponentially more the case. So I think your point's very good in terms of this is not just enabling certain technical functionalities, it's really fundamental to our economy. Kyriakos, you had a comment?
As a very happy and grateful visitor to Canada, from that kind of outsider's perspective, I guess I would offer two comments in response to your question. First of all, the fact that Canada historically has been positioned as, in many things, as a territory, as a sovereign nation that sits firmly between stuff that happens in Europe and stuff that happens in the US, given that 5G already seems to be developing completely distinct flavors in Europe and the US, to me it's particularly exciting that Canada has the privilege to be able to take the best of both those worlds and come up with a beautiful version of your own. The second thing I would say is, in my past experience in this business, Canada has been at the absolute forefront of, for instance, fixed wireless access, due to your topology, Canada's topology, and for instance, groups such as Inukshuk, groups such as Xplornet, have really been world leaders in terms of how fixed wireless access for the first time was seen to be scalable. It used to be one of the in-jokes of our industry that fixed wireless access just never scaled and also never made basically money for anyone. And Inukshuk and Xplornet have been proving people wrong for a long time. And given that 5G has a very strong element of fixed wireless access, that's another front that I really look forward to see how Canada pushes forward and pushes the boundaries of what can be done.
Thanks. So we identified spectrum as obviously being one of the challenges. Another thing we hear a lot about is, especially as we get into smaller cell deployments, is really the regulatory frameworks and regulations around deploying these small cells in municipalities and sort of some of those regulatory hurdles. Do you have any comments on that in terms of, how difficult will it be, do you think? Are there things that industry and other stakeholders should be doing to try to ease that process? Maybe Bruce will ask.
Yeah, I mean, we clearly have long-standing relationships with municipalities, with primarily our wireline team, and as we've deployed small cells, have developed relationships with all of them. They're not a massive, deployment of small cells for coverage, which I think we're talking about as millimeter wave deploys. But I think sometimes you say, oh, you got 10 times the cell sites, but to Brian's point, 20 gig radio is kind of like this, right? So, with some innovation, they'll be integrated into every 10th or 5th or 8th street lamp or hydro pole, and be fairly innocuous. So I think that will be okay. I'm not anticipating a huge issue there. I think smart city and some of the enablers that 5G, high definition cameras in certain cases if that's what you need, and the broad range of smart city applications means there's something in it for them as well, right? And reasonably, public safety would be on a 5G network at that point. So I think if you can really build a collaborative relationship, you'll understand that it's a win-win on both sides, and I'm not anticipating a problem.
Brian?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting, again, if you look around the world at how people are approaching this, and the whole attach rights is such a big thing. If you go down to the US, the FCC has set up a broadband advisory committee focused specifically on bringing back recommendations on this front. The European Union has a whole activity underway about reducing red tape to allow this to happen. If we want to create the economic advantages that Alexander was talking about earlier, this stuff has to get into play. And if we continue to treat small cells like big cells, where you're putting a tower in and go through a large consultation process for every box that's the size of a suitcase, it's going to be a problem. Now, that doesn't mean industry should just be able to do whatever the heck they want. But we need to have a policy on a municipal level, and probably you need provincial, federal support in trying to make all this happen. We need a policy that says, here's what we all agree is the right way of approaching this. Here's what's a standard methodology. Let us come in and say, we're going to go downtown, I'm going to deploy 100 of these in this zone, make it one application, get done with it, move on. As long as it's in a format that we've already all agreed to, it should be relatively straightforward. And that's the only way we're going to get these kind of networks in play.
Yeah, and we've at COT, we've created with our members a working group to talk to government and other stakeholders about that, trying to figure out where we can come up with those best practices and reduce some of the red tape. And I know members have their individual discussions with municipalities as well. I think I saw a hand. Was that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Just one more. It's easy for us to push municipalities and various regulators to create a regulatory framework. I think operators have a lot to do to educate the public and to create the demand that makes this stuff happen easier. Those of us that have been through the development of a cell site understand the steps going from A to production, and every one of those implementations has its own personality. If this is going to become a much more routine type of activity, then we need to have a much stronger sense of public advocacy and demand coming from the municipalities that we want to touch and the neighborhoods we want to touch that will benefit from the outcomes.
Yeah. We're going to keep the discussion going, but if there are questions, I'd ask people to go to the mic now, and I'll acknowledge you once I see some people with questions. And I know it's a topic that has a lot of interesting aspects to it, so please don't be shy. I wanted to ask about with 5G, how do you think, if you kind of look into your crystal ball, how is it going to change the way operators are doing business? Not just business models, et cetera, but just internal processes, things, if we look 5 years, 10 years, what will a Rogers look like? What would a Bell, what would an Xplornet, et cetera? What will they look like? Does anyone want to take a... You can't be wrong, really, because we're just speculating here.
Well, I think, we're seeing now where networks are getting very complex, so self-optimizing networks are a reality. So there's a lot of network intelligence working in the background to automate and tune. We've got parts of the network under closed-loop control. So in general, we'll be relying more heavily on automation, on engineering, on big data to help drive our networks. So, it's really important to refresh the team, bring in, young, bright recruits, engineering, computer science recruits to help build this architecture of the future. So in terms of, the team, if you're a learning organization, it's a positive thing. You're heading in that direction anyways. For us, we talked about fixed, and we'd see fixed services, wireless to the home, wireless to the prem, as being a network slice of a broader channel. So mobile and fixed would be coincident in the same channel. So there's going to be a little more mixing between the two. I think it was discussed earlier that the distinction, because our ability to generate traffic densities are so high, that distinction is going to go away. Having said that, we're big proponents of fiber, and the traffic density you can get with 10 gigabits to each home and 4,000 homes per square kilometer is astronomical. So, but these will work together and create value.
I think in the short to medium term in rural Canada, a lot of this will sound esoteric. And back to a point you asked previously, Alex, about how the products. So we're still fighting the connectivity challenge and the delivery of base broadband services to a lot of parts of the country. So primarily the benefits of improved spectral efficiency and ability to deliver capacity are going to be what is going to continue to be a primary interest to rural Canadians until we solve that problem. Now, that said, smart cars will drive on highways through rural Canada, and that connectivity will be important. Smart mines are and smart farms are just as important as smart apartment buildings. So I think you'll see an evolution of these things, like a sort of a gradual adoption. But for us at Xplornet, connectivity is our primary focus, and where we expect to see a lot of benefits coming out of the first implementations of 5G. As far as, and I'll speak generally about something that Bruce touched on. Yes, the team will need to change. We'll need to make sure we have the right mix of heritage thinking and architecture and knowing how to run the shop, in addition to different types of talents that are able to make the connection between what customers think they want, what customers are willing to pay for, and what we can actually engineer and deliver. All the while making sure we're not building a legacy of license obligations with other providers to deliver that type of capability to us.
Thanks. Any other comment on that? No. So in terms of the type of workers you're going to need in the future then, in terms of the skill sets, et cetera, how is that going to change? You know, does Canada have sort of that pipeline of people that have the right education and skill set to be able to provide, you know, to build the networks that you guys are trying to build?
Yes, I think so. I think, you know, we should be proud of our universities. They create top quality candidates. I mean, you know, if you're 20, 22 and you got a chance to write software in Silicon Valley, it's pretty tempting, right? So we have to adapt and really create environments where they want to build the infrastructure of the future. So that's on us as leaders to create those environments and keep them at home and even attract others that there's just an exciting place to be, and there's a lot of benefits of being here, and that's a challenge. But the guys are there, the team's there between the university crews that come out every year. There's no doubt in my mind we've got the students, we've got the workforce, and it's more than that. I mean, there's guys in the field. It takes a lot of different roles to be successful, but you know, we've built high quality networks. There's no reason to believe we can't continue, be it, you know, structural stuff that goes on, antenna design, all the way through to network architecture, software, service development. I think really it's our ball to drop.
Yeah, and you know, if you look back over time and where we all started in this industry, took a couple of RF engineers and a core engineer to just get together and make things happen. But of course, we had 100 sites in Ontario at that time, and it was much simpler to manage. Where we're going now with everything we're talking about is multiple frequency bands, multiple layers, macro cells, medium cells, small cells, in-building, out-building. The reality is you can't have enough engineers to manage such a network and have it work properly, to be maintainable and sustainable. So you're really going into the world, and you know, much used AI terminology is where every system now is looking at how can we get to a plug-and-play environment where frequencies are self-organizing, networks are self-healing, and that's where it's starting to go. So it's not that the jobs are disappearing, but boy, do we need people on top of there who understand radio systems and write the software and make pieces come together in a proper way. And we've got the right people in this country. There's a lot of R&D going on in Ottawa and other places among all the various manufacturers as well as within operators to try and figure out how to make this happen. And we've got the right people coming out of schools to do exactly that kind of work.
Did you want to add something? Sorry.
So Brian just made my point for me, but I think that there's a layer on top of that, which is because these networks open up all manner of different opportunities. You know, Canada's got a rich heritage in terms of application development, in terms of innovation on top of networks. That's something that you know, we can certainly build on. Bruce mentioned we've got a lot of spectacularly good universities in this country. There's again a rich heritage of innovation available there, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot more innovation on top of what the networks can bring. Yes, the you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, all of those capabilities are going to be brought to bear. But the really exciting part is going to be what people do and innovate on top of all of that. And I think that's what's going to be more than just the you know, the things that we can see right now.
Again, I'll just ask: are there any questions? No. So I think we'll just get sort of into closing remarks, and maybe I'll just ask each of you to sort of something you'd like to leave the audience with, whether it's something they should think about when they think of 5G, if they should maybe not think about or disabuse themselves in terms of any myths around 5G, but just really what you'd like to leave the audience with whether it's something we've already touched on, you want to reemphasize, or just something that we haven't got to, and maybe we'll go in reverse order this time. So, Alexander, if I could put you under the spotlight here.
We believe 5G is fundamentally it is a leap forward. It is not just a pure evolution. It's not just another G on top. Every 8 to 10 years we get a new technology and it arrives. This time it's going to be different in the sense that it's not just about more speed. It's not just about always-on connectivity. It's the ability to actually push applications and services right to the edge. The ability to manage billions of devices connected to the network. The ability for completely new business models to appear, whether it's a sponsored model where the customer, in fact, has got an application or a service. They don't even know where the services come from. It's sponsored by others. The ability to drill down to the individual level in terms of applications and services and customize them, and for the ability for Canada to innovate on all of that. I think for us it is exciting. It is an evolutionary opportunity. It will be driven by use cases. It's not going to happen overnight. Canada's demographics and geographic capabilities are going to color the way that 5G arrives. It's not going to be the same as the US. It's not going to be the same as Europe or Asia. It will be our own version of it over time. It will come out, I suspect it will come from both sides in terms of the wide area for on low band frequencies for IoT type services, and also for high band frequencies that will start in areas of population and work outwards. So we see it as very much of an evolutionary approach, building on existing networks, but offering a huge opportunity for Canada to innovate and for industries to innovate in this country.
Great. So we've got about 2 minutes each left. So if you just that I don't get the hook from Mark.
So just quickly, and I would say, I'll go back to the journey comment I started with. And while I agree 100% with the end game that Alexander was commenting about, I still believe what will happen is you'll have, first ones will come out, and it'll just be better what we have now, faster, lower latency. Then you'll get into more IoT applications. Then you'll get into fixed applications. And over time, as all the industries start to figure out what to do with this stuff, then all the complexities come into play. The key is we all have to be preparing now, and we are, putting in the building blocks and pieces to allow that to happen so you don't have a revolutionary step to take in a future year.
Yeah, so along the same lines, a few years ago, after a long struggle, we saw in fixed networks, fixed access networks, the ability to finally get to a point where consumers of broadband could say, okay, now I actually have more than enough. I have more than what I need in terms of broadband speeds and capacity on fixed access networks. If in the early stages of 5G we can get to the same situation, the same feeling and level of satisfaction with wireless networks, with mobile networks, getting to the point where we say, well, finally, wherever I am in any building, with this small cell densification effort going on, and being able to tie up all these different bands that are required to get the necessary amount of spectrum and capacity in the network, we're there. I now have all the capacity I'm likely to need for the time being, wherever I am. I think that's a huge step forward. And then all the rest of the wonderful stuff that Alexander will be serving for us a few years down the line is going to be wonderful stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tim?
Excuse me. I hope what you're hearing from the panel is a lot of consistency and commonality of purpose. I think we're all motivated to use our investments and public resources to the benefit of Canadians. Maybe it's just a question of timing and intensity with respect to what's going to happen next. But from my own selfish perspective, I'll just sensitize the audience to the notion that we still have a long way to go in rural Canada to satisfy core connectivity. I don't think of too many of my friends out in small town Ontario who would say they're completely satisfied with their connectivity options. So as a first step for Xplornet, implementation of 5G will be solving that, and then building on top of that with other types of use cases.
I guess for me, the thing I'd like to leave you with is let's not be too enamored with the first iteration of 5G. I mean, people are going to put out a 5G waveform. It's going to be very much like what we have today. And to be honest with you, it's not really that hard. But you really have to look at where the innovation happens, network slicing, when people are really using 5G to do something different. That's really the evolutionary, or the revolutionary, I should say, point. And that's going to be hard to see. That's going to be quiet and subtle and in the background. But that's going to happen in 20 or 30 or 40 times, and you're going to see the value of 5G coming gradually over time.
Great. So this last chance for any questions. Oh, we have one here, yes.
My name is Mike Kadar. This looks very exciting. 5G is what we always dreamt about. It will come. Connectivity everywhere. But my question to the carriers is, are you going to become experts in all the various industries to provide the application, or are you going to open up your networks to allow operators to develop their own application and provide service in-house as well as to their customers, the way electricity is provided? We do not see the hydro generators getting down to the electric apparatus that people use. Why can telecom or ICT be similar to water, to electricity, to allow connectivity everywhere and to people to innovate, to use it as they wish to get the best value? My question is, will 5G finally open up the wireless network? Thank you.
I think we're all out of time. No, just kidding. Who wants to take that one?
I think that, it's hard to imagine us developing deep vertical expertise in every area. I think, you may specialize in a couple, one or two, but there will be partnerships. With our trials we're running, we have partnerships today. Those will get deeply rooted in how different groups participate in the business model that ultimately it comes out of it. Remains to be seen, but certainly there's going to be room for people who have expert knowledge of propane tank distribution systems and creating optimized delivery mechanisms for that. And that's multiplied thousands of times. So it's hard to imagine those kinds of people being resident in Bell. So I would say, yes, we look to open up to a greater extent than we have in the past. Creating some middleware to make it easy, mind you. But I think there's still a role to play for someone with deep vertical expertise.
Anyone else want to add to that? Yeah.
So very similar in terms of we certainly believe in partnerships. The chances of every operator becoming an expert in every vertical is slim to none. So partnerships are by definition how it's going to work. And the reality is that companies that walk through the door have their expertise. They're the experts in their particular field. The question that you have is, how do they plug in? And I think that's one of the things that will change in 5G, is the ability to open up more types of APIs and with more capabilities. There really aren't that many at the moment, and we all respectively have API portals that we allow, but there's a limited amount of functionality that is available in today's networks. That will change with the ability to actually push those capabilities. It's not as if people aren't innovating right now. The reality is there's vast amounts of innovation that happens over the top today, but I think it will change in terms of the extent to which you can actually look at the network down to a more granular level.
And just a last comment on that from myself. I said earlier that partnering is going to be the key to where we need to go, and we can't be it, just as was said here, we can't be all things to all people. So we're going to partner with people, we're going to take the pieces that we have, put them together with others to deliver new enhanced services, and that's going to be the way of the future. There will be things that every operator is going to say, I want to own this particular vertical or this particular slice of a business in the sense of that's your core competency, but there's no way we're doing all of it. So there has to be a lot more interaction and more cooperation going forward.
Great, thanks. So my takeaway, I mean, just even with those last comments, is that, we can really tell, that the Canadian ecosystem, wireless ecosystem, is really committed to maintaining leadership for Canada in wireless. And what it's exactly going to look like and what time frame and which comes first and which comes second is maybe still uncertain. But there's a lot of effort going on here, and I think there's just a lot of exciting opportunity for Canada. So I want to thank the panel. If we can just give them a round of applause. That's great.